right, folks, today we actually have some really big news. And when I say big, I actually mean it. I know sometimes people look at the titles of my videos and they're like, oh, is it really big? You know, he puts it in everything. Is it really great? I'm not calling it great news. I'm actually a little, how do I put this? I'm a little miffed at today's news. I'm not really sure how I feel about each of these individual stories because while there is some silver lining, bright spots to some of it, there isn't for other aspects of it. And this is because we need to talk about, well, first off, we have the Circana data. We have the Circana data, which is the sales data for the United States for November. And it's not just that Nintendo lost the PlayStation 5. We already knew that. Like, who cares? But it's that the entire video game industry is down in sales. How bad? The cumulative hardware sales. We know exactly how many sold. We haven't seen this low of a number for cumulative all video game hardware sales for the month of November since 1995. Yeah, it wasn't really good for anyone. Even PlayStation 5, which did really well, is down 40% year over year. That's a disturbing trend, but also kind of fits in with maybe some people's expectations that things are just expensive, even when they're on sale. So maybe the sales are lower. We'll talk about that though. Nintendo appears to be offering different size game cartridges now to developers. And that sounds like a good thing. And like it should curb the use of game key cards. But as always, the story isn't that simple. And these lower capacity carts might not actually get used very much. We'll talk about why with that. More than that, we do have some good news, at least in here. It does appear that GameCube emulation appears to have gotten an update and is getting better on Nintendo Switch 2, so that's great. We have some news about Dispatch coming to Switch and Switch 2 and a release date for that. That's good news. We also have some great news for at least one game made by WB Games, and obviously indicating there's going to be a bright future ahead for this IP, and this IP is on Switch and Switch 2. And more than that, I do want to try to end with a bit more of a positive note, given that today's stories, while massive, are also, you know, kind of like a double-edged sword. We want to go over the current lineup Nintendo has right now for 2026 because it's actually quite a few games we know Nintendo is publishing next year, and it's a pretty big list, bigger than you guys might realize. All right, that being said, folks, before we dive into this video, I want to remind you we are giving away 3 copies of Final Fantasy VII Remake Integrate, which has a free demo right now on Switch 2. We are giving away the Switch 2 version. You can go ahead and check out that demo and then enter our giveaway through the link down in the pinned comment or the description. Again, we'll be giving away those copies next month. Beyond all of that, we are on our road to 170,000 subscribers. So if you are enjoying the news and you want to stay up to date on all things Nintendo, go ahead and subscribe. Also, hey, we have the Nintendo Byte podcast tonight, but look, who cares about any of that stuff right now? Because you know what? We got a segue to our sponsor. Well, folks, it's the holiday season. And as the holiday season comes, a lot of you guys will be picking up a Nintendo Switch 2 for your first time. But even if you're not picking up this system for your first time and you're actually, maybe you're like me, you've had it since launch, what could be happening is the holiday shopping spree, presents, and everything else you're getting in between, even the invention of game key cards. Let's say maybe for Christmas, someone gets you Assassin's Creed Shadows as an example. That's a game key card. You're going to probably come close to running out of storage on this, especially if you don't want to archive all of your games. Thankfully, the Switch 2 has a solution for this. It's called microSD Express in this little tiny slot here. You can actually see sort of that I have one there. And what do I have? Why, the Lexar Play Pro 1 terabyte. That's right, folks. Lexar is sponsoring today's video, so I can let you guys know that this is available at Costco right now. So you guys should definitely go check this out because, again, 1 terabyte, look, this can handle up to 2. 2 terabyte doesn't exist yet. This is the world's first 1 terabyte. You guys should definitely go check it out. Remember, you have to use microSD Express with Switch 2. It will not function correctly with normal standard microSD because, hey, you need the read speeds, which this one has, what is this, 900 megabytes per second, 600 write, 900 read. Now that's obviously up to numbers, peak numbers. Hey guys, go check this out. Look, I've been rocking the Lexar 1 terabytes ever since the Switch 2 came out, and I gotta say, I haven't had one issue with storage. Sure, I'll eventually fill it up. I'll eventually probably have to archive some stuff, but by then I'll have so many games that there clearly will be a batch of them that I'm probably not going to be touching for a while. But you know what? Being able to load up dozens and dozens and dozens of AAA games on this system simply because I have this cannot be beat. So go ahead through the link down in the pinned comment or the description. Check out the Lexar Play Pro 1 terabyte at Costco. All right, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into some sales data for the United States for the month of November. One of the largest, I'm not going to say the largest, but one of the largest sales months for video games of the year. It's December is actually the bigger month, but November is also massive due to Black Friday. So let's get into it. November 2025 US video game market highlights thread from Circana. The release of Call of Duty Black Ops 7 marked the 18th consecutive year that Call of Duty franchise release has been the best-selling game of its release month, while PS5 led hardware in both unit and dollar sales. Although he goes on to note later that Call of Duty is actually down like double-digit percentages year over year. Despite that, it just goes to show how big Call of Duty actually is, that it's still the leader for the month for 18 consecutive months. It's like the 7th best-selling game of the year. It just goes on to show like the strength of Call of Duty, even in a down year for them. It's still just incredible numbers. But we really want to focus on the hardware because the software side of things, like none of Nintendo software really charted like crazy. You know, you can see the November top 20 here. And again, Nintendo's doesn't include any of their digital sales. And you can see, you know, some entries on here from Nintendo. You see Pokemon Legends EA holding pretty steady at number 6, entering a new month from release. Then we see Kirby Air Riders and Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment really debuting right next to each other at 10 and 11, again without any digital sales data. Donkey Kong Bonanza is up here, actually took a jump in November. No surprise, people buying new Switch 2s. Donkey Kong Bonanza is one of the best games in the system, if not the best. So that took a 10-spot jump to number 14. Beyond that, you know, we don't have splits between platforms to know which one of these games is selling really, really well on Switch 2. Like, what if NBA 2K made up 50% of sales on Switch? Oh, we have no idea. Pretty doubtful on that front, too. But anyways, just throwing that out there. I think it's good to look at some of this stuff. But as we get back in, I want to actually go over the hardware, because this is where things get really interesting. So monthly hardware spending dropped by 27% compared to a year ago. So that's just the money, right? And yeah, the money matters, but what matters more for the health of the market isn't how much people are spending in terms of total spend, because video game hardware is actually more expensive than it's ever been. It's actually unit sales that we need to worry about, because unit sales will determine a healthy market. And it said this is the lowest video game hardware spending total for a November month since 455 million. But that's not what we're concerned about. Here's what we're concerned about: hardware. 1.6 million units of video game hardware across all platforms sold in the US during November, the lowest total for a November month since 1995, which was 1.4 million. The hardware average price paid for a new unit of video game hardware reached an all-time November high of $439, up 11% compared to a year ago. Hardware PlayStation 5 was November's best-selling hardware. We already knew this. We knew this like a week ago. In both units and dollars, the first time this has occurred since the launch of Switch 2. Switch 2 ranked second for November across both units and dollars. The next Playground ranked third in hardware units sold. Xbox Series, however, did get some sales and was actually third in dollar sales. November video game content spending grew by 1%. People are still buying games, basically, is what they're saying. But yeah, we have to go into this because Matt Piscatella did an interview with IGN about this data, and because it's concerning, right? It's concerning when you have the lowest November unit sales since 1995, and the industry is so much larger today than back then. It is concerning, and a lot of it's probably due to prices. I would assume video game platforms are more expensive than ever, leading to people buying less. And hey, last year you had things like the $200 Switch Lite is one of the best deals. You don't have that with Switch 2. There's no $200, no cheaper version of Switch 2. And even with PlayStation 5 on sale, it's on sale for what? The all digital's on sale for what MSRP was back in 2020. So maybe consumers aren't really finding it to be as big of a deal. That being said, PlayStation 5 was the number one seller, so the sales definitely helped. But they're down 40% year over year with their sales, according to Matt Piscatella in that interview with IGN. But Matt Piscatella isn't like sounding alarms yet. He did note, obviously, that December is the best-selling month, and this could just be an oddball month where, because nothing was really on sale, and, you know, Nintendo obviously didn't have a system seller, like a big system seller out exclusive to Switch 2 this holiday season. No offense, Kirby Air Riders and Age of Imprisonment. We all knew heading into this holiday, it felt kind of weird that you guys were the November games, and then we have Pokemon and Metroid sandwiching it, but like those are also on Switch 1. So like Switch 2 really did not have a big system seller this holiday. That said, Matt Piscatell did note that Switch 2 is still the fastest selling system. And the big thing he wanted to note is that this could just be a blip and December sales could still be really good. And if December sales are really good, then all this really means is November was just a sort of oddball blip, a culmination of price increases and spending limits for people because everything's more expensive, not just video games, tariff related stuff. You know, it could all just be kind of a snowball effect that might have just affected November. Maybe it doesn't affect December. If it affects December, then you start to see a trend where, okay, we'll have to obviously see this for multiple holiday seasons. But if this entire holiday season is shot for video game hardware sales, that is not a good sign heading into the next year. Now, a good sign for next year, though, is GTA 6 is coming out. That's clearly going to heavily push PlayStation 5 sales. And Nintendo has their lineup that hopefully has some big names in there. What is very clear is the market is not liking the current prices of consoles. And we know with the chip shortages and everything going on that things could get more expensive. I think it would behoove really the two market leaders, right? We can call them co-market leaders, whatever you want to say, PlayStation and Nintendo, right? They're the two most relevant in the console market right now. It would probably behoove them to not raise prices any further, keep the prices where they're at. That would just be my suggestion. I know you might lose money per unit sold, but sometimes you have to eat that cost. And PlayStation does this all the time. But Nintendo, sometimes you got to eat that cost. And when you're seeing these lower sales, I think that's a pretty good indicator that you're not going to raise the price. I hope. We'll see. But yeah, that's what I mean by it's kind of weird. Like, this isn't really good data. It's not even good for PlayStation 5. Even though it took the lead. I mean, yeah, congrats to them for taking the lead for the first time since Switch 2 came out. And I guess it's good news that Switch 2 is still the fastest selling system ever, but that was never really in threat this holiday season. That threat will probably come 3-4 months from now where it could fall behind like PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5's pace. I don't know, guys. I'm just reporting the data. You guys do with this data whatever you like. All right. Next up is where we get into this really interesting story around, well, game key cards and, well, game cartridges for Switch 2, because we now have so many people coming out of the woodworks on this. It's probably because I happen to know behind the scenes that Nintendo started offering these two companies today, literally today, smaller size game cartridges. So Nintendo comes out and says, I can confirm that smaller capacity Switch 2 game cards are in production, but due to chip shortages, it will take some time before we see widespread availability. You're talking few months, probably into 2026, where like they're widely available, where every company will be able to use them if they want. Despite the smaller capacity, these cards will still be expensive. That's the key thing here. The cost of the 64 gigabyte cartridges, not the size, is why so many companies are using game key cards. This needs to be understood. It's not the size of the cartridge, it's the cost of the cartridge. And these smaller size cartridges are not really that much cheaper. So it really might not encourage that many companies. But if it can get even one or two companies to change their tune and go physical, cool. There could also be that some companies aren't happy with the sale of their game key cards, as an example. So maybe they want to have smaller capacity and go physical their next time around. That's a hope for some people, that maybe people not buying game key cards is leading to them wanting to go physical. So Nintendo having these options is good. I mean, there's nothing bad about having options, other than it's really expensive. All right, as we go in, he says a few more things. For those asking about speed, the smaller cards actually will be slightly slower. Not as slow as Switch 1 cartridges, so I'm told, but not as fast as the 64 gigabyte. 64 gigabyte seems to be that sweet spot for the speeds Nintendo was going for. But the slower, smaller cards might not, for indie titles and stuff like that, probably not that big of a deal. And Necro Felipe comes in and says, I believe the difference between costs is around $3 to $5 compared to like the 64 gigabyte one. Is that what's stated? I haven't looked too closely, but I don't currently have access to order sheets. Yeah, it's $3 to $5 cheaper. Got to remember, the 64 gigabyte one's rumored to be around $22. So yeah, $5 off is a big deal, but that still only gets like the 16 gigabyte version down to like $17, $18. That's still really expensive, especially for an indie title. Some indie titles sell for like $20, like Hollow Knight Silksong. A majority of that cost would be a cartridge. So that's why I'm saying, like, I don't really think game key cards are going to go away due to this change, but it is an option. And people always said it's the sizes. The sizes are the problem. Like, nah, it's really the cost. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Necrofilipe goes on to say 16 and 32 could be the new size options, which absolutely could be the case. I don't know if they're going to go with 8 because the cost difference from 8 to 16 it's literally pennies. Doesn't make sense. Anyways, this in and of itself would only solve one of the problems, which is the size of the cartridges, but we still have 2 others. Reading speed in relation to system memory, which of course, these are slightly slower, and low cost difference in relation to the 64 gigabyte ones. Again, this is just one of those things where, this doesn't necessarily solve anything. Like, everyone was clamoring for these sizes and they're offering them, but I don't know that it's going to stop game key cards from being widely adapted. And we have to talk about why that's the case. So I don't know if you guys are aware of this. Nintendo's the only handheld on the market to have physical. Now, you could talk about how the PCs, right? The PC ones, hey, PC's been all digital. Who cares? Those are the other handhelds in the market. I get you, but we have a PlayStation 6 handheld coming. It's rumored. There's new rumors today, new reports on what they're aiming, and they're trying to make it quote unquote low cost, whatever that means. Maybe they're trying to match the price of Switch 2. I don't know. Either way, they're making a PlayStation 6 handheld, and every single rumor, and when you read through all of it, you'll come to find out they're not offering a physical option. This is an all digital handheld they're offering. Now, for Sony, where 80% of their sales are digital, it's not that big of a deal. But the point is, this is now a console manufacturer, not a PC one, offering a handheld that doesn't support physical. Last time they had, handhelds, Vita, PSP, they offered physical options. Doesn't look like they're doing that this time. So Nintendo is the only handheld in the world, literally, besides like little kid leapfrog tablets, offering physical games. When you're the only one on the block offering that, the physicals are going to be expensive. No, discs are not an option. You have to use cartridges in a handheld format, and they're going to be expensive, especially when you're the only ones using them. So, yeah, there's no real ease of solution here if you want game key cards to go away. Obviously, this is better than not having the options at all, and it does save a few dollars, and there will be companies that use it because of the $3 to $5 difference. I just don't think it's going to be enough to really curb the widespread adoption of game key cards. Just my personal take. We'll see how the market responds. Next up, Square Enix. So we've known for a while now that Square Enix is not exactly doing fantastic. They've talked in prior investors meetings how, hey, we can't really do exclusives anymore. It's not working for us. We need things to be on all platforms because they're just not doing well financially. Not in trouble to go out of business or bankrupt or anything. They're still, profitable, but their value of their company has gone down quite a bit. And now a certain investment group has invested in them, and this investment group tends to push when they get involved for companies to sell. And that's usually when a company doesn't seem to have a business plan in place that's conductive to actually turning the business around. And this comes from Bloomberg. So over here it says patience required. Activist fund 3D Investment Partners has been nudging shares of Square Enix Holdings Company both lower and higher over the past week. First, the Singapore-based outfit incited investor frustration for not being radical enough. That's right. Radical enough in suggesting reforms to revive the struggling games maker. Then it reignites hopes that such proposals may be imminent. So basically, investors, when this company got involved, other investors in Square were actually frustrated that they invested and then offered no solutions, because that's usually what they do. So investors are frustrated. This is what we learned from this. Investors are frustrated with Square Enix. The activist group last week published a detailed 112-page letter criticizing, that's right, they're investors in the company, and they released a 112-page letter criticizing Square Enix president Takahashi Kiryu and urging fellow shareholders to support its campaign for change. Maybe to replace him, I don't know. But it wasn't well received by other investors, as Square Enix shares fell more than 9% over the course of the week. The stock did recoup some of those losses this week after 3D disclosed and had increased its stake and suggested it would submit important proposals to management. 3D's involvement first became public in April, prompting hopeful speculation about its intentions. The fund had a track record of pressuring companies such as Sapporo Holdings Ltd. to take aggressive steps to boost shareholder value. Its stake building also followed news that Square Enix honorary chairman Yoshihiro Fukushima sold his Tokyo mansion raising questions about whether he, who is the founder and largest shareholder with just under 20% of shares, might eventually divest his holdings. There was a lot of hope baked into the stock, Bernstein analyst Robin Zhu said, and that's why the initial set of ideas from 3D for Square seemed to be greeted as something of a letdown. So far, 3D's public actions toward the Final Fantasy maker have been limited to accumulating shares and authoring a letter that largely reiterates long acknowledged challenges. The fund has not yet offered particularly bold actions, such as major asset sales. When 3D first came in, investors hoped they might push for asset sales or some hidden way to unlock value, even a full sale of Square Enix with a takeover premium, said UBS securities analyst Yuji Zay. But the proposal does not seem to be able to surprise investors with no additional value in sight. Event-driven investors are now pulling back. As the 3D letter notes, Square Enix has struggled for years to deliver blockbuster hits, a problem blamed on poor management of the development pipeline, over-reliance on Sony Group Corporation's PlayStation at a time when Switch platforms boomed. And by the way, for people thinking that that's not really a thing, like they've always been strong to Sony ever since PlayStation 1, we do have to note something here that we do have data on. Dragon Quest XI has sold roughly 8.5 million units. 5 million of those were on Switch. So deprioritizing the market leader in favor of PlayStation at a time that Nintendo was just dominating in sales. I'm not saying that's necessarily 100% true today, but was definitely true during the Switch generation. Yeah. It definitely felt like Square Enix might have missed the boat with some of their larger IPs, which, yeah, we're seeing now come over to Switch too. But sometimes it's a little too late situation. All right, getting back into this. It does say an access of low-quality releases and alienated fans. A high-cost structure to game production also weighed on profitability. These issues largely accumulate under former president Yusuke Matsudo, not Kiru. So yeah, a lot of this happened under the person who used to be in charge. Since taking the helm in 2023, Kiru has led sweeping restructuring efforts, canceling unprofitable mobile titles, streamlining development processes, revamping internal teams, and shuttering overseas studios. Under his 3-year plan through March of 2027, Square Enix is focused on downsizing with major big-budget titles expected in the following period. Soichiro Fukada, senior analyst at Takei Tokyo Intelligent Laboratory, said the company is moving in the right direction. The company is already doing quite a lot itself, he said. It's just a case of waiting now. A key risk is that Square Enix has acknowledged these reforms will take time, and that in that period, its prominence could fade as an onslaught of competition hits game stores each day and competes for finite attention. Developers globally say it's increasingly difficult for new games to stand out as players remain committed to a limited set of long-running live service titles. Square Enix doesn't have a good answer for how it'll maintain its brand recognition without commanding such a title. The company's flagship role-playing game franchises like Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest remain iconic, but recent entries have leaned too heavily on remakes, which Dragon Quest hasn't had a new entry since before Switch came out. It's crazy. Both lost a lot of their thunder in the last 10 to 15 years, and Square Enix seems out of touch with the mass market that is now jumping on Chinese-made RPGs instead. As UBS's Zay says, the real test will be whether Square Enix can develop fresh, big-budget franchises capable of supporting the business for years to come. Debating on how now might be premature, but 3D's intervention is bringing the issue to the fore. So basically, we're at this point where Square Enix isn't doing well. They have a plan to turn things around. I think the best solution is just for Square Enix to turn things around. I don't want Square Enix to be bought by anyone. I don't want anyone to, I don't want them to split up their assets and sell them off to different companies, like sell Final Fantasy to Sony, sell Dragon Quest to Nintendo, stuff like that. Look, Nintendo could technically afford to straight up buy out the shares. Square Enix are worth about 6.8, 6.9 billion. Nintendo has over $14 billion in a bank. Nintendo doesn't like to borrow money, especially for acquisitions. So they do have the funds to actually buy Square Enix if they wanted to, or at least make a competitive offer. I don't think anyone's going to over-offer for Square Enix. That doesn't make any sense. They're struggling. Why would you over-offer? That said, Square Enix is not currently for sale. They're not trying to be for sale, but the fact that this investment group is involved, and if things continue to not look well, don't be surprised that this investment group pushes hard, and it does seem there's support for this from other investors for Square Enix to actually sell off some of their assets, if not the entire company. That does seem to be, that's my biggest takeaway from this, is that the investors are opening up to the fact that they actually would like to see the company sold. And if the founder, who has, the highest stake, starts to sell off some of his, it's a good sign that maybe Square Enix will actually be sold. And that does excite investors. But as a gaming fan, I don't want this to happen. Like, yeah, it's cool. Like, look, I'm a Nintendo content creator, so if Nintendo bought Square Enix or even bought like the Dragon Quest and their developers, maybe bought Team Asano and some related development teams that make some of these HD 2D games, yeah, that would be kind of cool, and Nintendo would just add to their exclusive portfolio, and that would be sweet. But also, like, they're a multi-platform company. I'm not one of those people that's like, hey, take these games away from everybody else. We know Nintendo would do that because that's why they buy these companies. They don't buy them to make games for other platforms. They buy it to make games for themselves. So even though that gives us more to cover and drives excitement and might even drive sales, I want to be honest, as exclusives and promoted by Nintendo as exclusive games, they actually could end up selling really, really well over here. It's still one of those things where I feel like the best move is for whatever plans they have currently in place by the current CEO to actually work. The company turns around, stays independent, and everyone keeps getting their games, and they stick with their multi-platform strategy. It's very obvious investors are kind of pissed off that there was this, 8-year window with Switch where Square wasn't bringing their biggest games over, and the games they did bring over, like Octopath Traveler, Triangle Strategy, actually performed really, really well on the system. Dragon Quest Builders, Dragon Quest 11 performed very well, but then we didn't get any of the big Final Fantasies of the new ones over, and so you were missing out on like this key market of sales for Square Games. It seemed that there was actually a lot of investor frustration over those decisions, regardless of how hard it would have been to downsize those games to get them on Switch. Bottom line is sales matter. They're not selling well. It doesn't matter how pretty the games look, right? Like, not for investors anyways. So what does this all mean? For now, nothing, but this could be the precursor where we get a year or so from now. Don't be completely shocked because of this story. We find out that Square Enix is actually for sale. Now, I went ahead and wanted to confirm this after I saw this post over on Reset Era. Just tried Wind Waker comparing side by side with a real GameCube. There's still definitely some emulator lag playing on real hardware. We're talking about playing Wind Waker on Switch 2. That's abundantly clear, but it does feel noticeably better than it did when it first launched. And other people in this thread are saying the same things. I went ahead and booted it up. Look, I'm not the biggest connoisseur of this. I don't have a GameCube, like a natural GameCube next to me to compare. It does feel pretty good. I did test out some of these at launch of NSO for GameCube. Yeah, I'd say it feels a little better. I don't know that, again, I'm not the best person for this, but Reset Era is full of a bunch of hardcore gamers, and they're all saying that the input latency's gotten better. So I just wanted to point out that there's been some stealth updates to GameCube NSO, and it does seem games have better and better input latency, which was a major complaint when GameCube first launched on NSO. Next up, let's turn things around again to another positive story. This was just positive all around. How about Dispatch coming to Switch and Switch 2? Oreo64 here has Dispatch releasing on Switch and Switch 2 on January 29th. Now, these are Australian prices, so you're looking at these prices. If they seem a little bit high, again, these are Australian pricing. These are not US pricing, but the point is their Australian eShop is how we became aware that not only the Dispatch is coming for sure to Switch 1 and Switch 2, but also that it has a solid release date. So Dispatch was one of the best games of this year, up for multiple game awards. Really happy that that's coming over. Nothing negative to say about things that are just good news like that. We want good games on our platform. So there you go. Next up, how about WB Games actually having something to celebrate? We know that they're in the midst of like being bought by like Netflix or whatever, and there's there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and WB Games has struggled. A lot of their more recent titles, pretty much since they ended the Batman series and started doing other things, a lot of their games just haven't been doing well until this one. Best-selling game in WB Games history, Hogwarts Legacy. Thank you to our community for 40 million units sold. They sold an additional 6 million units this year. This is by far and away the most successful game they've ever made. This obviously does mean there's going to be a sequel. We already know a sequel's in the works. But yeah, this is insane. Obviously, a fully supported Switch and Switch 2. I'm not saying a majority of those sales are Switch and Switch 2. This is obviously spread out across all platforms, but hey, man, this is good news. It's good news for WB Games. It's good news for Hogwarts Legacy. They have a bona fide hit. This is obviously going to continue regardless of Netflix or Paramount or whatever happens with WB Games and WB in general. We're going to be getting more. We're going to get more from Portkey Games. We're going to be getting more Hogwarts stuff because, again, it's undeniable the massive success this game has been, the biggest success in WB Games history. Last up, I just want to take a look briefly at Nintendo's currently announced lineup for next year. Now, a couple of these I don't care as much about because they're just Switch 2 editions, but setting those aside, there's still actually quite a bit of games Nintendo already has announced for 2026 for us to look forward to. So let's dive in. Obviously, first off, we have January 15th with the Switch 2 edition of Animal Crossing New Horizons. I think it's cool, but not something I'm that interested in. I am interested in the free content update, though. That said, February 12th, we have Mario Tennis Fever. March 5th, we have Pokemon Pokopia, which is a Switch 2 exclusive. Spring, we have Yoshi and the Mysterious Book. We also have Super Mario Bros. Wonder 2 Edition. I don't really care that much about that one, but it is there. Tamagotchi Life, Living the Dream. Then we have Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, Rhythm, Heaven, Groove, and technically Splatoon Raiders, which isn't for sure next year, but left in a pretty good state when we first saw it. But we'll have to wait and see if it actually makes it next year. I'd be shocked if they teased it this year and it's not actually coming until 2027. That would surprise me. I kind of feel like Splatoon Raiders might be like a summer game for Nintendo. So that's already what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 new games coming from Nintendo that we already know about heading into 2026 before we ever have our first 2026 Nintendo Direct. It's a good sign. It's a very good sign for things to come next year. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. All right, guys. I am Nathaniel Ruppeljans from Nintendo Prime. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hopefully you guys tune in tonight to the Nintendo Byte podcast. We've got a killer episode. Hell, we got to talk about some of the news even from today's video tonight because, as I said, this is some big news in here, but also kind of confusing news. I'm not sure if it's positive or negative for some of these stories, but they are big. Thank you guys for tuning in. Catch you in the next one.